This is Fire and Fate by Serena Valentino. We're on Chapter 8. From the Book of Fairy Tales, A New Circe. It had been weeks since the Odd Sisters lost their sister Circe. The fairies were hard at work restoring the land that had been destroyed by Maleficent, and no one knew where she had gone. The Odd Sisters were distraught, exhausted by their grief over the loss of their sister and their worry over Maleficent. Hades hadn't expected their grief to be so prolonged, and he was doing everything he could to help lift their spirits so they'd be strong enough to help him. And when he let himself admit it, he hated seeing them suffer so terribly. He had taken to just letting himself into the Odd Sisters' house without knocking. Today he found that the kitchen table was filled with the numerous cakes he had brought over on his previous visits. He sat the new cake on the table after making room amongst the others, and looked around to see where the Odd Sisters might be. They were not in their sitting room where he usually found them, poring over their journals and spell books, or calling to Circe and Maleficent in one of their magic mirrors, to no avail. Instead, they were in Circe's old bedroom, all of them lying side by side, squished in her bed, just staring at the ceiling, staring into nothingness. "Okay, ladies, time to get up. I've brought you some cake," Hades said, clapping loudly and smiling widely as he hovered above them. The Odd Sisters remained catatonic, their eyes unmoving. He wondered if they even knew he was there. That was, until Ruby murmured, "No more cake." "What's this? An Odd Sister who doesn't want cake? This must be serious." Hades was doing his best to be jovial, to lighten the mood. He knew his usual fiery tactics wouldn't work if he wanted these witches to regain their strength so that he could perform the spell he needed. Besides, he had already tried threats and they hadn't worked. He reminded them they were still considered his honored guests at the underworld, and that at any moment he could imprison them there, but they didn't care. They said they'd rather be in the underworld than live in the many kingdoms without their sister. So Hades had to come up with yet another plan. "This is deathly serious," said Lucinda, who was sandwiched between her sisters, looking Hades dead in the eye. "Come now, get out of bed, the three of you. I know you're grieving, but we mustn't let ourselves waste away. I've got you a delicious hazelnut cake. Your favorite." "That's not our favorite, and we're never getting out of bed again. Our sister is dead, and we've lost Maleficent," said Ruby. Hades knew the Odd Sisters were tired of him coming over every day to check on them and speed along their recovery, but he was losing time. If he couldn't get them to agree to help him soon, he would have to go back to his own realm and fight Zeus without their help. And as much as he didn't want to admit it, he did care for these witches. "What if I told you there was a way to create a new Circe, and I can help you?" The Odd Sisters sat bolt upright, like toy vampires popping out of their coffins. They looked ghastly and malnourished and even paler than usual. Their hair was matted, their makeup smeared, and they were still wearing the same dresses they'd worn the day they thought Circe had died. "Holy Nosferatu. Holy Nosferatu," he said, staring at their appearance. "All right, Miss Havishams, the first thing we need to do is get you out of those dresses." He reached out his hand to help them out of bed, one by one. They looked at him as they often did when he said things they didn't understand. He waved his hand, putting them in new dresses of black velvet with silver star embroidery, black and white striped stockings, and black pointed boots. "Maybe we should do something about those rat's nets," he said, looking at their tangled ringlets caked with frosting. "I almost feel like a fairy godmother," he said as he magicked their hair into perfect ringlets again, dressing them with jaunty feathered hats fashioned with crows sitting in nests of black netting. The sisters looked at him dumbfounded. "You know, because I'm giving you a makeover," he said, his arms stretched out like a vaudevillain. "Don't start doing your pizzazz hands. We're not in the mood," said Ruby. "They're called jazz hands, and I wasn't going to. Look, I'm really trying here. I'm pulling out all the stops. Hair, makeup, dresses, shoes, just like the fairy godmother." And that was all it took. The mere mention of her name sent the Odd Sisters into a fit of anger so fraught with malice they were storming around the room and plotting their revenge. Hades understood. When he wasn't procuring the Odd Sisters' cakes, trying to revive their spirits, or checking in with Pain and Panic to make sure they hadn't managed to destroy the underworld, he read about the events that led to Maleficent destroying the fairylands, and they were right. It had pretty much been the fairy godmother's fault. If she hadn't been so cruel to Maleficent, treating her like an outcast, deciding she was evil because of the color of her skin, and that she, God forbid, had horns, Maleficent would likely have never become so angry, triggering her transformation, even with the help of the Odd Sisters aligning the cosmos. The Odd Sisters set the scene. They made it possible. But it was Maleficent's heartbreak and anger that caused the transformation, and it was the fairy godmother who caused that heartbreak. "I will skin her alive, then I will boil her in oil, not before I rip her wings from her back." "What have you done?" Flans was staring at him from the Odd Sisters' vanity. She was annoyed. "Hades, I finally got them settled down before you arrived." Her tail was swishing violently, and her eyes were narrowed and angry. I had to do something. It's better than the alternative. They were catatonic, Hades said, giving her a scratch behind the ear. Is it? She said, jumping off the vanity and sleeking to the door. Well, now you have to deal with them. I need a break. She exited the room with a swish of her tail. Hades decided it was better that it was now just the four of them. He wasn't sure what Flans would think of his plan. Ladies, now, look what you've done. You've sent Flans away. Don't you want to listen to my plan? You have, well, time enough for your revenge after you've created a new Circe, he said, hoping this would be the way to get them inspired. He had read in the book of fairy tales that the witches of the Deadwoods had great powers, necromantic and otherwise, and numerous spellbooks that held their secrets. And he learned from his crows that there were young, inexperienced witches out there now, trying to take their places as the queens of that land, but they were struggling and would be grateful to meet other witches who could help them. So he decided it would be the best to send the Odd Sisters there in the guise of offering their help so they could go through those books to find the spell they would need to create another Circe and split his string of fate. Of course, it'd be easier to just go there and get the spell books himself, but he did promise the Wraith Queens that he wouldn't enter the Deadwoods again, and if it was within his power to do so, he always tried to be a demon of his word. A new Circe? Yes, a new Circe! Wouldn't that be grand? Just like the other one. All I ask in return is that you cast a spell for me. What kind of spell? It's not a big deal, really. I just need you to split my string of fate in half so there'll be two of me. They stared at him. And how do we do that? We don't possess that sort of magic. We don't even know the spell. But you have the power. The fates told me so. Now you just need the spell. You have ties to the witches of the Deadwoods, so you won't have trouble entering the woods, and you're just as entitled to the magic of those lands as the young witches who reside there now. Visit Gothel and her sisters in the Deadwoods. Don't tell them who you are, and while you're there, look in their mother's spellbooks. There has to be something there that shows you how to split the fate strings and how to create a new Circe. And we're supposed to just walk into the Deadwoods and say, hello, let me see your mother's spellbooks? Gothel isn't going to think that's strange? I think she and her sisters will be happy to meet other witches. Happy for some help. From what I understand, they could use some. I hear Primrose and Hazel are unwell. You could offer to help them look for a cure in their vast library. It would give you an excuse to poke around and find the spells we need. The Odd Sisters looked intrigued, and Hades could see their thoughts racing. And if we do this for you, split your string, will we be even? We shall see, he said, seeing his plan was coming together at last. But we can't go off to the Deadwoods to help other witches while Maleficent is still lost. What if she attacks another kingdom and someone tries to kill her? Said Ruby. Leave Maleficent to me. The crows are keeping an eye on her for me. I'll find her and make sure she's safe. You go to the Deadwoods and find the spells we need, and I will lend you my power to help you in any way I can. And listen, this is important. When you get to the Deadwoods, try not to act so odd-sistery. What do you mean? You know exactly what I mean. These young witches have been through enough without you talking all crazy and doing your weird odd-sister stuff. Just be their friends. Wouldn't it be nice to have some friends? Chapter 9. From the Book of Fairy Tales. The Sleeping Dragon. Hades had his hands full looking after Maleficent while the Odd Sisters were away. So he was pleased when they finally made their way back to him from the Deadwoods. He had been spending more time in the Forbidden Mountain and decided to do some decorating to bide his time while he waited for their return. He created a lower dungeon beneath the throne room by way of a narrow set of stairs that led down to a cavernous room with a monstrously large fireplace with a blazing fire. The fireplace was flanked by two enormous dragon statues, and before it was the sleeping Maleficent in her dragon form. Hades had put her under a sleeping enchantment so she could rest and recover after her ordeal. Since Maleficent's arrival, Hades' crow and raven spirits often flew down to the dungeon to check on her. They felt protective of her now, since it was them Hades had sent out to search for her. On one of their searches, they had found Opal, Maleficent's crow, and brought her back to the Forbidden Mountain so she could tell Hades her story. The moment she told him where he could find Maleficent, he magically transported the dragon into his dungeon, and that is where she would stay until she had time to become herself again. Time to let go of enough of her heartbreak, terror, and rage. When the Odd Sisters finally arrived, Hades was sitting in his throne room, petting Opal, who was perched on the armrest. It was the Odd Sisters' first visit to his castle, and he was happy to be in the company of his witches once more. Welcome to the Forbidden Mountain, witches! I thought you would never return. How do you like my new digs? Asked Hades, smiling at the Odd Sisters. Digs? Have you been digging? Why not just use your magic? Asked Lucinda, making Hades laugh. I'm so happy you dingbats are back. So did you find the spells we need? He asked, letting Opal hop on his shoulder. We're happy to see you too, but we promised Gothel we would return to the Deadwoods soon and try to help her with her sisters, Primrose and Hazel. They are dangerously ill and fading fast, said Lucinda. The Odd Sisters seemed more focused to Hades, much more than they had been before they went to the Deadwoods. He had hoped giving them a purpose would help, and it seemed it had. We're so disappointed we couldn't find anything in their spellbooks to help poor Primrose and Hazel, or bring Circe back, said Martha. If I didn't know better, I would say you're fond of these witches. You should go back as soon as possible. I'm sure the answers are there to both that and how to split my string, said Hades. Oh, we found the spell for the string, said Lucinda, giving Hades a devilish grin. Way to bury the lead, he said, startling Opal with his bombastic voice. So tell me, what did you learn? We found an interesting spell, one that can split a witch into 3, and we think that some modifications, we can use it to create 2 of you. Hades wondered if the odd sisters understood the implications of the spell they had just described, but they had kept chatting away, and he decided they hadn't made the connection. His witches were smart. They tended to be singularly focused when they put their minds on something, and yet they would often completely succumb to being distracted from their purpose. Tell us, did you find Maleficent? Is she safe? Asked Martha. Oh, I found her, he said. Is she okay? Where was she? Asked Ruby. She was on the verge of attacking Morningstar Kingdom. Opal here found me in time to save her, but I put Maleficent under a sleeping spell before she could do any more damage. She's resting safely. We should visit her. Don't get distracted from your purpose, my witches. Let the Dark Fairy rest and recover for now. She's full of grief over what she did in the Fairylands, he said. The Fairy Godmother deserved what she got. I agree, but let's get back to this spell to split my fate string. How long do you think it will take to perfect it? Not long. By the next full moon, then the time will be right, said Lucinda, who seemed to have a gleam in her eye. It's only a few days from now, and you can have it ready by then? Good! I have plans of my own, and they need to be 2 of me to achieve them, he said. Just then, Flans came into the chamber. She had been stopping by to check on the Dark Fairy since she had learned she was sleeping in the lower chamber. Flans, welcome back. I hope you're well. The tortoiseshell cat walked into the throne room as if she were queen of the place, making Hades chuckle, considering who she really was. I'm well enough, Hades, and I see my witches are in better spirits. I came to see if all was well with them, and to check on the Dark Fairy. Where is she? Where she's been every time you visited her, in the lower dungeon, keeping warm by the fire. She's still sleeping, said Hades, loving that he knew a secret about Flans that the odd sisters did not know. May I go down and check on her? I won't disturb her, she said, narrowing her eyes at him, no doubt hearing his thoughts and reminding him with her reproachful looks to keep his mouth shut. Of course, you are, as always, my most honored guest here, or anywhere I may reside, he said with a sly wink. Remember, it's the narrow stairway on the left. Please don't go lurking down the wrong passageway. You might find yourself among the dead. Thank you for the warning. Flans stretched before taking her leave and heading down to the lower dungeon to see the sleeping dragon. Hades saw the looks of bewilderment on the odd sisters' faces, but he knew it wasn't about Flans. There are 2 portals down there, one to my realm and one to the chamber below the Deadwoods. I know, I should have told you about the one in the Deadwoods, but I wanted you to become friends with the witches there. I didn't want you just skulking in and out like the sneaky little witches you are, finding what you came for and rushing home. You need friends, witch friends, and who better than the witches at the Deadwoods? Someone to think of as family. Something had happened that he didn't expect. He was allowing himself to admit he cared about these witches. He had been telling himself he was simply sending the odd sisters to the Deadwoods to get the spell he needed, and while that was true, he also wanted them to discover who they really were without all the chaos, blood, and destruction the fates had foretold. And before he could truly take in that he was becoming actually fond of these batty witches, the odd sisters surrounded him, hugging him and giving him kisses on the cheeks with tears in their eyes. What is it? What did I say? Get off of me! His cheeks were now covered in red lip prints. You like us, they said, grinning at him wildly. Oh, stop it, he said, trying to wipe the lip paint marks off his cheeks. You may not want to admit it, but you like us, they all said, laughing and jumping up and down like giddy schoolgirls. Oh, off with you. You have work to do. Spells to perfect. Now get out of here, you dingbats, he said, trying not to let on that their gesture touched him or that they might have been right. As Hades watched the odd sisters skitter out of his chamber, he wondered what he had gotten himself into. Did he truly care for these witches? And would it prove to be a mistake letting them into his cold, black heart? Only time would tell.